Hello, welcome back to my channel. Hello, I miss you guys. So I'm back and I'm gonna talk about a book here. I actually have finished more than one book at this point, but I think for this video I'm only going to talk about, just one book because I'm a little bit tired. So one book it is, and here's that book. This is Farewell to My Concubine by Lilian Lee. So Lilian Lee is an author from Hong Kong, and she is also known as Lee Picwa. And this book was published in 1985, originally in Chinese, but apparently there was the movie adaptation of this book that was released sometime in 92, 93, I think, and sort of parallel to that, the author kind of revised the novel and then published a revised version. And I believe that this edition that I'm holding, which is the movie tie-in translated edition, is actually the translation of the revised edition. I think. I'm not too sure about that, but I'm just guessing because when I look at the the copyright page of this book, apparently it says here that the copyright is for the year 1992. So I assume that would be for the revised version. Then again, I'm not sure if there are any differences between. I think there are probably going to be some differences between the revised and the original version, but yeah, I have no idea about that, and I don't have the 1985 original Chinese version with me. But anyway, this book that I'm holding is the translation done by translator Andrea Lingenfelter from Chinese to English. And before I talk further about this book, let me just say I love this. So yeah, that is going to set the tone for the rest of this video. I love this book. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. Anyway, what is this book about? This book is set in the 20th century in China. Specifically, I think it starts sometime in late 20s. All the way until 1970s, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, sometime late 20s all the way until 1970s in China, for the most part. And we follow the story of one character, or not exactly one character, but two characters, since they're boys all the way until they're old men. So one of the characters' name is called Xiao Douzi. Okay, and Xiao Douzi was when we start this book, we find out that Xiao Douzi is the son of a prostitute, and this is a scene that takes place in the late 20s, and this prostitute, she's really poor, and she doesn't have the means to support her son, and therefore she decides to kind of sell off her son to the boss of a Peking opera troupe named Master Guan, and that's how Xiao Douzi ends up becoming the charge of this boss of the opera troupe. And over there, as a child, like he finds that his surrounding is still, everything is really new. He encounters another boy who has joined the troupe for quite some time already, but a little bit older than him, but fairly close in age, named Xiao Shitou, and they end up becoming friends, really good friends, where Xiao Shitou would always defend him from the other boys in this opera troupe. Now, it's important to note that this opera troupe is consists only of boys, because at the time the Chinese opera or the Peking opera is performed mainly by men. Even the female roles were also performed by men, and so the membership of this troupe consists mostly of just boys. And it is in this troupe, under the leadership of Master Guan, who is like super strict. They train for a few years in order to become actors in the Peking opera later. And so basically it is in this opera troupe that Xiao Douzi ends up sort of shining, and Master Guan assigns him to be assigns him with the role of Dan, or heroine, in the Chinese opera, whereas his friend Xiao Shitou ends up being assigned the role of Sheng, which is the male leading role. So these two boys, who are best friends with each other, they end up becoming like the star student of this troupe, and then one ends up being sort of put into the role of heroine, which is Xiao Douzi, and Xiao Shitou becomes being put under the role of the hero. And this sort of sets the background, or rather the context of this entire novel, which I think is really interesting, especially when it comes to how the relationship between these two boys and later these two men are developed. So eventually they leave this kind of like training ground and become like bona fide actors in their own rights. They become really famous, they become celebrities, and they basically become big actors. And all of these happen with very interesting political events in the background. So in the late 30s, there was this the Second Sino-Japan War, and so there was this presence of the Japanese in the background as we are following the stories of these two boys, or rather these two young men. I think at that time they were already sort of become at the age of young men, and as the story progresses, the historical setting also changed according to what happened based on what year. So by 1945 the Japanese surrendered, and now China enters into this long phase of cultural revolution, and this would eventually become very important to the story as well. But regardless of what happens in the background, it doesn't really swallow the core of the core story in this novel, which is basically this friendship, the relationship between Xiao Douzi and Xiao Shitou. And this friendship would eventually become something that is very much interesting. Especially after they become like professional actors, become financially independent, it just gets really obvious what is the nature of the relationship between these two men. And the story would eventually become even more complicated when Xiao Shitou ends up encountering a young prostitute with whom he would eventually marry. So this would kind of introduce a different complication in this book, and I personally just really enjoy how the dynamics between these two characters, and after the entry of this new character, the wife named Juxian, how the dynamics between all of these characters just kind of bounce off each other. It's not a very, I would say, a very easy and comfortable relationship between these characters, and that kind of makes this story feel sort of dramatic and very interesting if you are into stuff that are kind of, soap opera-ish. But it also doesn't get too over the top that you feel like you need to suspend your disbelief, because everything just feels very organic, because we see these dynamics being something that transpire through years of relationship, just sort of being slowly, gradually forming into this the bonds between these two characters. They just kind of like slowly become something that feels very real, and we can see that progress happening as we read along the story. We can sort of understand why this character acts like that, why this character acts like this, and it feels intimate in a way, but at the same time you know that you are a reader of a historical fiction. Now, on top of that, like I mentioned earlier, there's this historical setting which the story of these characters are set against. That also feeds into these the personal story of this character. So, in a sense, when you're reading this book, it's not going to just be a book about personal relationships or human relationships, but it is also going to be quite heavy in terms of history and politics and all the implications that political upheaval and war can have on things that are really personal, such as human relationships, love, marriage, friendship, and stuff like that. How all of those things are affected by all of these sort of big things that are happening in the background. Now, something about this book, though, that I personally notice is that if you are familiar with, I would say, queer narratives, there would definitely be themes in this novel that you may consider to be quite obvious. Like, just reading the description at the back, you can sort of already judge what is the nature of the relationship between these two boys. So that's not exactly a spoiler. And I would say anyone who is familiar with queer writings or queer narratives, queer stories, would definitely see many things that are very familiar and written in a way that is sort of obvious and maybe even heavy-handed. But it's not heavy-handed in a way that is preachy. You can definitely sense that there are going to be themes of, stuff, very common motif in queer stories, such as gender identity, the sort of like the contrast between the true self versus the projected self, the contrast between fiction and reality, the kind of like also the contrast between what is deemed normal versus what is deemed abnormal, the playing around with this idea of social outcast. Like in this book, we have characters who are prostitutes and also actors. Both of these characters are considered as people who aren't respectable. So there is also this playing around with the idea of respectability, and also one of the most one of the most obvious things is that you have the two main male characters. One is that they are actors, and so there's already this idea of, you know, having like, you know, acting out a role of something, you know, on the nose kind of stuff. And then also, let's not forget the fact that one of the characters are assigned the role of females, the heroine, and one is assigned the role of males or the hero. And so on stage there would always be lovers or married couples and stuff like that. And, you know, just kind of like parallel that with whatever that is happening to them out of stage. It is kind of interesting, but yeah, you can say that it is very obvious. But I would also say that for some readers this is probably not something that is really obvious, because it's just something that I notice sometimes, you know, like especially when it comes to queer writings, there are certain readers who are probably less receptive towards very obvious queer coded things, which is okay, you know, because that's the purpose of reading. You get to kind of like learn more about stuff that you may not know about. But anyway, yeah, like I said, it's not preachy, but rather, if you are familiar with those themes, you may find that, you know, encountering them again in this book just kind of makes you feel, probably would make you feel kind of, you know, familiar with it, or make you feel kind of seen, perhaps. Because overall, in the way that this book touched on those themes is that it doesn't pass any judgment. Basically, this novel just kind of focus on the story. It does not say, oh, this character is bad, that character is bad, you know. Even within the dynamics between these two male characters, Xiao Shito and Xiao Dozi, and also Xiao Shito's later wife Ju Xian, you know, the complicated relationships between them, it is not written in a way that suggests that, you know, someone is a villain, someone is not. There is some kind of antagonist in this book, and I would say that the antagonist can be attributed to things such as war and the political turmoil that happens in this book. But yeah, in any case, I think the way that the characters are written make them feel very human. They are written to be very flawed, and they're not written as someone who are perfect, which I think is great, because now you end up with characters who are very layered, very interesting, so many things to dissect about these characters, and it just makes the reading experience be really fun. So I think that's all I want to say about Farewell to My Concubine. And yeah, it's it's a really interesting book, but I have not seen the movie. But I have seen the synopsis of the movie on Wikipedia, so I kind of know how the story turns out. And if you have seen the movie but not read this book, I would say this book's plot is kind of different from the movie. There are going to be some differences, which I think would really change the narrative. But I don't want to say more about that. Let's just say that this book is going to serve you something completely different, at least from based on, you know, what I read about the movie synopsis on Wikipedia. But yeah, it's gonna be quite different. So if you like the movie, you should totally try this book and see, you know, if you can, you know, come up with some interesting comparison. Yep, because this book definitely has some significant differences. Anyway, that's all I want to talk about in this video. I'm not going to talk about the other books I finished, because I suppose that's it for tonight. I am tired. So I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching and bye.